What is up, YouTube? It is the Return of the Mediator. I am back with my Agent Carter Episode 3 review. Sorry. Excuse me. Sorry, guys. As you can tell, I've been a little bit sick, so that's why my review's been a bit behind. So, let's get into it. The episode starts out, and it has a really awesome intro, which basically is a voiceover of Peggy saying, "I'm Agent Carter. Ever since the war's been over, haven't been really doing much, but now I get an opportunity to do more since Howard Stark's in a bit of a jam." So, Peggy begins the episode in her room, and she's looking through all these symbols when somebody starts climbing up her drain pipe. And when this guy gets to the window, she points a gun at his head and says, "Who are you?" And he explains that his name is Jimmy and he's here to see his girlfriend Molly. She points him in the right direction and goes back to what she's doing. The next scene is with SSR agents Thompson and Krasinski as they interview the building manager, who had an apartment that was rented out by the man in the green suit. The manager leads them to said apartment, and the agents find cash, passports to Alfred Led, Orson Box, and Fredro Rousmini, and they find the special typewriter. The next scene is at the Griffith Hotel brunch, where Peggy's talking to a couple of her friends like Angie and a few other people, and Angie makes a joke about Jarvis and Peggy possibly being in a relationship, when the manager comes down the stairs and makes this whole big spiel about Houdini. She starts talking and says that he's had this one problem, which was the stairs, and then rats Molly for spending the night with Jimmy, and goes on to explain that the Griffith Hotel is basically like Fort Knox or Alcatraz, in the sense that it's impenetrable. Peggy gets an idea believing that no building is ever impenetrable. And before we move on, I just have to say, this scene seems like epic foreshadowing, and that Peggy is probably going to get in trouble for her mission, which will lead her back to the Griffith Hotel. That's just my bet. Next scene is back at the SSR, and Brannis is getting info. And he finds that... The SSR agents are actually finding information about Brannis. And they find that Brannis had died 3 years ago in Moscow. And so they're wondering how he's alive and what the relation with the long-range transmitter typewriter could be. And I wrote in my notes that something about this scene is that Jarvis and Peggy could possibly be discovered for trying to figure out what this is. Next scene is Peggy going to see Jarvis, and Jarvis makes mention about Peggy trespassing, as she's just kind of hanging out in the front door, or rather a window, looking in, trying to get Jarvis's attention. Peggy basically asks him to see the vault. She wants to know how somebody got in. Jarvis explains that there was a 2-hour power outage due to a thunderstorm, and then he eventually fell asleep, and that's probably when someone robbed the vault. This is when the SSR comes to the door, asking about the car whose license plate that they found at the crime scene of Roxxon Oil. Jarvis explains that it's been missing for several days, and that's when the agents ask him to come downtown for extra questions. There's a bit of a commercial break, and we come back to the SSR building. Agent Krasinski is asking for the night off, and after asking everybody and getting no, he finally asks Carter, who's walking in the building, if she'll take over, which to him is being desperate. But she makes a funny remark by asking if it's his wife or his girlfriend that he's taking out, which prompts some laughter from the other guys. Agent Thompson leads an interrogation against Jarvis, and in the investigation he shows Jarvis 2 pictures, one of the man in the green suit and one of Brannis. Thompson mentions that they worked for Stark, and Thompson also implies that Jarvis was the man who drove the car on the night of the Roxxon incident. Now, obviously, Jarvis is trying to do his best to deny this, but it's kind of hard considering he's not a liar, though he's doing a pretty good job. At this point, Peggy has walked into the building and is watching what's going on, just in time to see Thompson use his smoking gun. He explains to Jarvis that they know he was charged with treason, that Jarvis had served in the military but was honorably discharged, and due to the fact that Jarvis is British, they have what it takes to deport Jarvis, and Thompson ultimately threatens to do this. And he makes some comment about Jarvis's wife, to which Jarvis responds, "Leave my wife out of this." And Thompson says back to him, "You should have thought of that." At this point, Carter jumps to her feet and comes up with an amazing plan. She needs to get Dooley's signature for something, so she walks back in and has Dooley sign a paper. We don't really see what it is, though. Well, she comes back, and Peggy explains to Dooley, who's just barely about to use the smoking gun against Jarvis. She says, "Oh, yeah, I kinda accidentally had you sign the car report, which basically which frees Jarvis, effectively." Well, let's say Dooley is not very happy about this, and yells at Peggy, and then she's eventually let out. And this is particularly awkward when Peggy has to leave, and everyone who works there is looking at her. After the commercial break, we return to the show, and Peggy answers her apartment door. And this is when Angie comes in, and they're talking about their day, but Peggy's a little bit frustrated with what's going on, so she kind of asks Angie to leave, which makes her a bit mad. They run into the manager and the new resident named Dorothy, who wants to be called Dottie. They have a brief exchange, and eventually both Peggy and Angie leave. Angie leaving out of anger, and Peggy leaving to go see Jarvis. They go to see the vault, and there's a giant hole in the floor. So Peggy and Jarvis decide to scale down, as if they were rock climbing, with, ropes and everything. And they go down, and it leads to the sewers, and Peggy makes note of this, saying that Brannis could have used a boat. Peggy asks about the treason in a roundabout way, but when Jarvis doesn't really answer, she says, "I don't really need to know," and he says, "Fine," and doesn't say anything. Well, back at the SSR, Krasinski's a little bit grumpy that he's stuck on the night shift, and he gets into a bit of a verbal exchange with Agent Sousa. And in the argument, Krasinski says to Sousa that Peggy's not going to date him, considering that she used to love a guy with a red, white, and blue vibranium shield, and she's not going to trade that in for a guy with an aluminum crutch. We go back to Peggy, and she finally out front asks for the real reason of the treason, and when Jarvis asks if his honor is enough, she says no. So, Jarvis explains that it was dropped immediately, and the story behind it is not one of a bad origin, but he actually did something really nice. See, he actually forged his general's signature on paperwork that allowed a girl named Anna, who was Jewish, to escape to Hungary during the war. This allowed her to not have to face the wrath of a concentration camp, and he was barely able to escape the death sentence, which he explains as her escaping the camps and him escaping death, which was a really cool line. I didn't say it accurately, but it was really cool. Well, he escaped the death penalty thanks to Stark, and that's why he was honorably discharged and then would later go on to be his butler. And Jarvis would later marry Anna. Well, they have some small talk, and right before the cut to commercial, they find that the symbol that Brannis drew in the sand is the symbol on a larger boat. After commercial, a car pulls up to the docks, and someone is by the boat. Well, who gets out of the car? Peggy and Jarvis. And they start to go on the boat, and it's revealed that Thompson is there, which is not really good. Well, Peggy and Jarvis go into the boat, and they find all these boxes under a giant net. It turns out that they're Stark's weapons. Peggy actually opens a box and finds one that glows green, and Jarvis explains that it was originally intended to be a back massager, but it was so intense that he decided to weaponize it. Well, Jarvis decides to grill Peggy after she decides that they need to take the weapons back. And these questions are basically saying, how are you planning to free Howard Stark's name? How are you going to be able to do this? Do you even know what you're doing? And he says that she has to clear Stark's names from the shadows. She can't go out there because she'll risk any chance of her future. Well, she says that this isn't going to exactly work, so she has Jarvis call Agent Sousa. She gives him the number, and he goes to a phone booth and uses his best Jersey accent to leave an anonymous tip. It's quite hilarious considering Jarvis can't really do an amazing Jersey accent. Well, Sousa and Krasinski are a little bit confused as to how somebody got this number, but they decide to go anyway. And Peggy turns around to find a huge guy charging at her. After the commercial, there's a bit of a fight scene, and in one of the breaks, the dude explains that he was told by Brannis that a woman was coming after him. And he says that he's not afraid to fight a woman. Peggy told him that it won't be very easy for him, and the dude explains that Brannis mentioned that too. In the end, Peggy is saved by Jarvis, and Jarvis is saved by Peggy, who uses the back massage weapon. Well, the final blow is dealt by Peggy, who uses a pole to beat the dude in the face. This is when the SSR shows up. Krasinski's a little bit suspicious and asks if it's fake, but Sousa finds the weapons and explains that it's real. The SSR comes to the boat, and they find the dude knocked out next to the weapons. Krasinski's happy because they could get a promotion out of this, but Sousa's a little bit curious as to how this happened. They arrest the guy and load the crates, and Dooley says to drive carefully and to not blow up Manhattan. The dude mentions that there was a British dame on the boat, which puts up red flags in the investigation for the SSR. There's a small car crash, and Krasinski's a little bit mad. So he gets up and starts yelling at a person who shoots him 4 times. And the guy who originally attacked Peggy gets shot 3 times. Then the other car drives away. 2 things to note. 1, Peggy is now free since Krasinski was the only one to hear about the British Dame thing. And 2, the assailant was female. So who could it be? After we get back from our final commercial break, Peggy goes back to work but finds that there's an awful silence. Rose explains that it's just too awful. When Peggy gets into the real SSR building, she finds the morning of the death of Agent Krasinski. Peggy asks what happened and is told that it was a professional hit. Sousa says that they got a call from an anonymous tip and that whoever had called was at the scene. Dooley still thinks that it's Stark's fault, and he says that he'll go call Krasinski's wife. The next shot is Peggy going to the diner and basically making up for not being there for Angie for the past couple of days. And she says that she wants to talk about her day a bit. She explains that someone had died at her office, and to make her feel better, Angie tells the story about her cousin who was hit by a bus. But before then, he knocked off a newsstand, so it was a weird form of irony. Peggy later goes on to explain that she doesn't know why she feels so bad. She never really knew, or for that matter, liked Krasinski. But she just feels so awful inside. Well, eventually, Peggy makes plans with Angie to spend some more time later, and that's pretty much the end of the episode. In the promo, Peggy has to be able to protect Captain America's reputation and stop some form of crazy experimentation. Well, that's pretty much it for me, folks. Thank you so much for watching Agent Carter After Show Episode 3, produced by The Mediator. I will be back next Saturday to review Episode 4, and this time I won't be sick, so it'll come out on time. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and please stay tuned to the channel because there will be more content coming soon. When the comics come to screens, you know who to call.